Okay, this is a podcast that's going to go over the characteristics of living things. So in biology, we are going to be studying living things in all parts of life and everything that is needed to keep things alive. And so we're going to start by talking about the characteristics of life. So all living things share several characteristics in common. They all have these distinct characteristics, and something is not considered alive unless it has all of the characteristics that we're going to talk about. So we're going to use these characteristics to define things as living or non-living. And you can see that there are some things out there that have some of the characteristics of life, but if they do not have all of them, then they are not considered to be a living thing. Okay, the first characteristic of life is that all living things are made of cells. When we talk about cells, cells come in two types. Cells can be either prokaryotic or eukaryotic. If a cell is prokaryotic, that means that it has no nucleus. A nucleus is a defined center of a cell. So if you look at this cell up here, it actually doesn't have a nucleus, so it would be prokaryotic. Whereas a eukaryotic cell would have a defined center right in the middle. So if I put a defined center where the DNA would be found, that would be the nucleus of the cell. Now, when we also talk about cells, we can also talk about how things can be either unicellular or multicellular. So an organism that is unicellular is made up of only one cell, whereas an organism that is multicellular is made up of many cells. So again, if you look at uni means one, when we talk about our prefixes, and multi means many. So, for example, humans are multicellular because we are made up of trillions and trillions of cells. So we can use these types of terms to start to define certain living things. For example, a bacteria or a bacterium are considered unicellular prokaryotes. So they're unicellular because they have only one cell, and they are prokaryotes because that one cell does not have a nucleus. Whereas humans are multicellular eukaryotes. So humans are made up of trillions and trillions of cells, and inside those cells you will find a nucleus. All right, our second characteristic of living things is the ability to reproduce. All living things have to have the ability to reproduce, and they need to be able to reproduce on their own. There are two main ways that reproduction can occur in living things. The first is called asexual reproduction, and if you put an A in front of a word, it means not or anti. So basically, asexual reproduction means reproduction without sex. So here you've got one parent that is going to divide in half. And what you end up with is an offspring that is identical to the parent. So examples of things that can do this, bacteria will divide in order to reproduce, so they're just making exact copies of themselves. Certain protists like algae, amoebas, things like that, those also will reproduce asexually. The other type of reproduction is called sexual reproduction, and this is where you have two parents involved. When you have two parents involved, an egg and a sperm are going to have to fuse their nuclei in order to create a new offspring. What's neat about sexual reproduction is that you end up with a mix of the two parents, so you do not end up with identical children. So this is how all animals and plants reproduce, is through sexual reproduction. There is an egg and sperm that have to come together, and they create a new and unique offspring each time. All right, our third characteristic, all living things have DNA, and DNA is what makes up our universal genetic code. So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a series of things called nitrogenous bases, which are represented by the letters A, T, G, and C. And all living things have this same code using these same letters, and those determine all of the characteristics of every single living thing. All right, fourth characteristic is metabolism. And if you look at this guy eating up here, he's got his little apple, we have to eat in order to get energy. So all living things have to have a way of obtaining nutrients and energy. Now the way that living things do that might be different, but all living things have to have that ability. So some living things are autotrophs. An autotroph, auto means self. So autotrophs are self-feeders. So they're able to make their own food, and they do that by a process called photosynthesis. Examples of Autotrophs are plants and algae, like the different seaweed that we find in the ocean and stuff like that. And they are all able to make their own food using energy from the sun. Whereas heterotrophs have to obtain their energy by consuming other organisms. So heterotrophs have to eat. The word hetero means different. So they get their food from a different source. They're not self-feeders. So in order to get energy and nutrients, they must eat. So we are examples of heterotrophs. We're animals. Fungi are also heterotrophs. They're decomposers. And so anything that has to take in nutrients in order to get their energy and to stay alive is considered a heterotroph. All right, our fifth characteristic of living things is the ability for an organism to maintain stable internal conditions, and this is called homeostasis. So homeostasis, homeo means same. So if we think about keeping everything in our body nice and stable, then we are in homeostasis. So this little guy down here is sick, and he is not in homeostasis. So things that we have to keep constant in our bodies: temperature, pH, being able to react to foreign molecules and pathogens and particles, all of those things we have to be able to keep stable within our body. And when we are sick or not feeling well, that means our body is out of homeostasis and we're trying to work it to get back to that point. All right, all living things have to be able to grow and develop. To grow means that you are going to increase in size. And to develop means that you are going from a simple form to a more complex form. So these pictures are showing basic human development. So we all start out kind of a bundle of cells, and we slowly develop over a 9 to 10 month period into having defined characteristics of a human being. That development actually continues right through when you go through puberty. And after that, you may still continue to grow and get larger in size. Okay, but your development has stopped. You stopped going from a simpler to more complex form at that point. But all living things have this ability to be able to kind of, increase in size to a certain point or develop into a more complex form. All right, number 7 is the ability to evolve. And this happens to a group. An individual cannot evolve, but a group of living things can evolve. And they have to be able to do that because living things have to be able to change with their environment. If a group of living things cannot change with their environment, they will not survive. So evolution is essential to the survival of a species. It happens over many, many generations, thousands to millions of years. But if an environment changes and a species is unable to adapt to those changes, then they will not survive, and that species will go extinct. Okay. And finally, our last characteristic of life is the ability to respond to the environment. So all living things must have the ability to not only respond, but detect their environment. For example, we know when it's cold, and then we can respond to that. Sometimes our body itself will respond. If we're cold, we'll get goosebumps and we'll start to shiver. Or we might put a sweater on, but that's a response to the environment. Other examples, plants will actually grow toward light. If you have a plant that's sitting in an area where only half the plant is getting direct sunlight and the other half isn't, the plant will actually kind of start to grow towards the light. Another example of this, deciduous trees, those that we have in our area, will lose their leaves when the cold weather comes, and that allows them to go dormant and allows them to survive the cold winter, and then those leaves come back in the fall or in the spring. Okay, so in order for something to be considered alive, they have to have all 8 of these characteristics. To some degree, the ability to do these different things. And so we will talk about some things that are considered living by some people, but they don't follow all of these, like viruses. Viruses do not follow all 8 of these characteristics, so they're not truly alive.